Furthermore, the actions of Moses and Aaron fractured the Israelite resistance to Pharaoh, because Pharaoh ordered his taskmasters to be the Israelite supervisors, and they failed to meet their quotas. The supervisors in turn became angry with Moses and Aaron for making their bad situation even more worse. Moses' lament to God following this episode shows how human prayer, even prayer born of frustration, is part of the process of redemption. Here, one also has a realistic portrayal of what often occurs when individuals or groups seek to challenge the status quo. Such challenges regularly result in initially making the situation of the oppressed worse than it was. The plagues, Exodus 7-15. The bulk of chapters 7 to 15 is taken up with a sequence of escalating plagues. It is worth noting that because of certain peculiarities and repetitions in the plagues, almost all critics believe that the current plague narrative combines several sources, each of which had fewer plagues in them. This can be easily seen by the fact that the fifth plague describes the total destruction of Egyptian livestock, but one finds livestock alive and well in subsequent plagues, ready to be destroyed again. See Exodus 9:6, 9:10, 9:25, and 11:5. It is possible that the variant portrayals of exactly how Pharaoh's heart or will is hardened with each plague. Ultimately, it stems from the fact that the Exodus is a composite narrative. Plague 1, Pharaoh's heart stiffened, Exodus 7:22. Plague 2, Pharaoh hardened his heart, Exodus 8:15. Plague 3, Pharaoh's heart stiffened, Exodus 8:19. Plague 4, Pharaoh hardened his heart, Exodus 8:32. Plague 5, the heart of Pharaoh hardened, Exodus 9:7. Page 96. Plague 6, the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, Exodus 9:12. Plague 7, he sinned once more and hardened his heart, Exodus 9:34, followed by Pharaoh's heart stiffened, Exodus 9:35. Plague 8, the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, Exodus 10:20. Plague 9, the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, Exodus 10:27. Plague 10, before crossing the Sea of Reeds, the Lord stiffened Pharaoh's heart, Exodus 14:8. There are two different Hebrew words being used here, translated hardened and stiffened, with two different subjects, thus creating four distinct descriptions of Pharaoh's implacability. It may be that variant sources spoke of God's control of events using different language, because each source had a unique view regarding the balance between God's providential control of events and the ability of humans to affect a particular situation. However, it is possible to give a holistic literary reading to the current form of the text. In fact, some scholars challenge the suggestion for a composite text, and at least with regard to the hardening of Pharaoh's heart, in that there does seem to be a balanced symmetry in the verbs used to describe the hardening of Pharaoh's will. Of the 20 occurrences of the verbs used, 10 have God as subject and 10 have a Pharaoh or his heart as subject. In such holistic reading, one might emphasize that early on Pharaoh had more control over the events, but as it is common with, say, addictive personalities, at a certain point one loses control over one's ability to resist certain patterns of action. The text could be read as signaling a gradual reduction in Pharaoh's ability to act freely as God's control grows even greater over the course of the unfolding narrative. Similarly, while the multiplication of plagues may stem from the text's composite character, one can see progressions in the narrative as a whole. Thus, the series of plagues arises out of God's wish to demonstrate to Pharaoh that God's claim on the Israelites supersedes Pharaoh's. Page 98 and 97. Here one must remember that the Egyptian Pharaoh was considered to be divine, and it is precisely this claim that Exodus story tests. In fact, one might usefully understand that the plague sequence as a contest, perhaps a showdown of sorts between two personalities, each of whom claims to be God. The God of the Hebrew Bible triumphs in the story by demonstrating that he, not Pharaoh, is the God who created and controls the universe. Broadly speaking, the sequence of plagues mirrors the order of creations. Thus, the first two plagues, turning the Nile to blood, and the plague of frogs, both indicate God's control over the waters. The next several plagues deal with God's control over land, the second major realm of God's creative activity in Genesis 1, while the plague of gnats in Exodus involves flying creatures. They are low-level flying pests that are brought into existence when Aaron strikes the dust of the earth with his staff. The fourth plague is more difficult to fit into this category, according to translation found in contemporary Bibles. Swarm of flies. However, the Hebrew word is rare, and Jewish tradition renders it as wild animals. In any case, the fifth and sixth plagues, which deal with livestock and festering boils, certainly demonstrate God's control of the domain of land. Hail and locusts. Plagues 7 and 8 in turn demonstrate God's control of the heavens. Plague 9, in which God darkens Egypt, in a demonstration of God's ability to control light and darkness, an ability first used on the first day of creation, and finally God's power to create living human beings. God's final creative act in Genesis 1 is alluded to in the 10th plague, which involves the killing of all firstborn Egyptians. At this point in the narrative, there is a very odd but important pause. Chapter 12 and 13 contain detailed rules for the celebration of Passover. What is odd that one would expect the first ritual reenactment of Passover, the holiday that celebrates the exodus from Egypt, to occur in the future, that is, after the event. But in Exodus, the very Israelites about to leave Egypt are also the first participants celebrating the remembrance of leaving Egypt by following a prescribed ritual. Page 99 and 98. Exodus 12:48 even specifies who may partake in the Passover as if already in the land of Canaan. Interestingly enough, later Jews who celebrate Passover already form a set liturgy that includes a command that individuals are to celebrate as if they themselves came out of Egypt this very night. Thus, time is collapsed in both directions in this ritual, in that those Israelites leaving Egypt act like later Jews celebrating Passover, and later Jews celebrating Passover act as if they are ancient Israelites leaving slavery in Egypt. Furthermore, a very close analogue to this situation can be found in the origins of the Eucharist or Holy Communion, in which Jesus self-consciously creates a ritual that he sees future Christians following. It should be noted that this ritual created by Jesus occurs at the Last Supper, a meal that several Gospel writers placed at Passover, which has traditionally been linked to its observance, even regarded by many Christians to replace it. Jesus himself becoming the sacrificial lamb. 1 Corinthians 5:6-8. Exodus 14 and 15 contain a prose followed by a poetic version of the crossing of the Sea of Reeds. Many scholars believe that the poetic text in Exodus 15 is one of the oldest passages, if not the oldest, in the Hebrew Bible. If this is correct, Exodus 14 would be a prose attempt to explain the poetic imagery of chapter 15 in a more linear fashion. One can glimpse this is somewhat variant images found in Exodus 14. For example, Exodus 14 juxtaposes. I don't know how to pronounce that, Dad. I'm recording, but I don't know how to pronounce it. I'm recording myself. More plausible images with other more miraculous explanations. While in verses 21 to 5, the action is caused naturally when an east wind blows all night and leaves a muddy marsh into which the Egyptian chariots sink. In verses 26 to 9, the Israelites cross on dry land with walls of water on their right and left, while the Egyptians are drowned when the waters suddenly return to their normal depth. It is more than likely if Exodus 15 contains an actual historical remembrance. This remembrance is now clothed in mythic images. The particular mythic images used here are borrowed from wider Near Eastern creation mythology, which regularly depicts evil forces as chaotic waters that must be split open and subdued before creation can occur. Page 199. Page 100 and page 99. In Exodus, this theme involves not only a newly ordered world, but God enthroned in his temple. Note Exodus 15:17-18. Trying to recover clear history from these mythic images is probably akin to trying to write a history of the War of 1812 on the basis of the Star-Spangled Banner. On the way to Mount Sinai, Exodus 16-18. These three chapters narrate a number of incidents that occur between Exodus event and Israel's arrival at Mount Sinai. Several of these stories that recur in Numbers and are part of a larger tradition of Israel's murmurings against God. There is also battle with Amalek, one of Israel's arch enemies, followed by a long chapter which Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, meets up with the Israelites and helps reorganize Israel's judicial system to alleviate some of Moses' burdens. It is worth observing that Exodus 18 provides a positive Israelite portrait of the status of foreigners immediately after Exodus 17's negative picture of the Amaleks. In the case of Jethro, not only is a non-Israelite viewed as acting morally, but a non-Israelite reshapes Israel's whole system of justice. The giving of law, Exodus 19-24. Exodus 19-24 stands at the beginning of the very long central portion of the Torah that runs all the way through from Exodus 19:1 to Numbers 10:10, dealing with Israel's time encamped at Mount Sinai. While the vast majority of the material from Genesis 1, Exodus 18 is narrative, the fact is that the Torah is, in many ways, primarily a law book. Therefore, one should not be surprised that the story of God's revelation of his divine law to Israel features so prominently. Page 101 and 100. Some of the words are hard to pronounce, Dad. Exodus 19 narrates Israel's arrival at the sacred mountain and the various preparations that are made for Israel's encounter with God. The chapter has many ambiguities in it, especially concerning the exact location of Moses, the Israelites, and God, and some argue that these are ingenious attempts to capture the moment of revelation from several differing angles. Such a momentous occasion would inevitably overwhelm those who experienced it and in turn leave them with various explanations of what happened. Exodus 20 contains the exact two recountings of the Ten Commandments, words repeated a second time in Deuteronomy 5 in a slightly modified form. It should be noted that although the term Ten Commandment is not incorrect conceptually, the Hebrew Bible and Jewish tradition refers to these as the 10 words or 10 principles or 10 utterances. Aseret Hadevarium, Aseret Hadibra. There are at least 3 traditions of counting the 10 commandments, with some variance between these systems. According to Jewish tradition, the first utterance is not in fact a commandment but a statement, which is found in Exodus 22. I am the Lord your God, who you took out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. The Protestant tradition understands Exodus 22 as a preface to the Ten Commandments and sees the first coming beginning with Exodus 23. Other variations can be seen in Figure 7. While the Ten Commandments are specially marked out by the narrative framework of Exodus 20 and contain several laws fundamental to human society, one must not lose sight of the fact that for ancient Israel, all of the laws within Exodus 20 to 3 and even more broadly with the larger Pentateuch are understood to be revealed at Sinai. When one examines the array of laws in Exodus 21 to 3, a collection of scholars called the Covenant Code, one finds many differing categories of law. There are, of course, criminal laws such as the law against kidnapping found in Exodus 21:16, laws concerning civil matters such as the law about damages caused by leaving an open pit in Exodus 21:33-4, ritual laws like those concerning certain festivals discussed in Exodus 23:14-17, and even moral laws such as a command in Exodus 23-4 to return the stray ox or donkey of one's enemy. Page 102 and 101. Dad, it has a Jewish word that I don't know how to pronounce in here. Do you know how to pronounce it?
Yeah, I'm really busy.
Okay.
Just making notes of it.
So showing us this box now. So I'll read the box. A bit complicated. Commandment: I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. You should not make for yourself an idol. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of God. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not covet anything else of your neighbor's. Jewish 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Catholic 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Protestant preface 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know what that means, but okay. I'm gonna get some water and pause the timer. I'm just recording myself and reading, but it's very complicated, this book. I think you were right, it is this complicated. What's that thing called when you expose to the sun for too long, or heat? Is it called heat stroke?
Yeah.
I think I've got heat stroke, so my brain feels all weird. Sorry, I left the timer. I mean the recording on. I put the timer back on. Right. We were on page 81 and now we're on 102. That's good. So we've done a lot of reading. In the Israelite perspective, all human behaviors, whether primarily involving God or primarily involving one's neighbour, or behaviors God has an interest in seeing performed properly. Furthermore, God issues these commandments to the community as a whole, and the whole community is held responsible for their observance. Page 103 and 102. Therefore, when one wrongs one neighbour, one also wrongs God and the larger community. Further, an offence against God is also an offence against one's neighbour that implicates the larger community. The close link between the Exodus story and God's giving of the commandments at Sinai affects one's understanding of the narrative as a whole. Many contemporary interpreters read the Exodus event as a story about being brought from slavery into freedom, God into the story itself. However, the real issues relate to who Israel is and to whom they belong and whom they will serve. The story describes a change of ownership in that it narrates Israel's movements from degrading bondage to Pharaoh, who claims to be a god but is simply an arrogant human being, to the human serving God, who is in fact has a right to claim human being as his slave. That the Israelites are considered God's slaves is evident from the passages like Leviticus 25:55, though this is often obscured because many translations render the Hebrew word for slaves as servants. Finally, when God finishes giving his instruction or Torah to the people, Exodus 24 describes a formal concluding ritual in which Moses sprinkles the blood from certain sacrifice animals on the altar and the assembled Israelites. It is likely that this ritual is a way of symbolically representing that now Israel stands in relation to God and his commandments as people connected by blood, people who are in effect part of the same royal family, a family with God as its fatherly monarch. Where will God dwell? Exodus 25-31 and 35-40. Chapters 25-31 describe in detail the measurements and implements needed to construct the portable tent shrine, which the Torah reports to Israel carried through her desert wanderings, as well as the rituals needed to inaugurate, I don't know how to pronounce that word, the priests and the shrine. Page 104 and 103. Exodus 35 to 40 then narrates the actual construction of this elaborately decorated and colourful shrine, which the Torah calls the tent of meeting. While many of these details will seem strange to contemporary Western readers, it is worth emphasizing that sacrificial worship was at one time the most common way for human communities to express their relationship to the divine, and it remains widespread in many Jewish parts of the world. Furthermore, both contemporary Jews and Christians belong to religions in which the logic of sacrifice remains central, even if the practice of actual sacrifice has been replaced by symbolic substitutes. In Judaism, I'm going to read it in my head now because I find it easier. Also, I have heat stroke or whatever it's called. Sorry to interrupt, Dad. This is fascinating.
No, because tell you why. I've got to put through his email address. I'll talk to you about it in a bit, though.
Okay. Just forget, it's just about Moses. It says in the Torah, Moses has an argument with God. That's all. That's all I'm going to say. It says it in the Torah. We can talk about it later. You can help explain it to me because I don't understand it. Remind me that.
Oh, right. Finally have a break. Oh. You what? Hello, hello, hello. I was about to promise off a glass of fizzy pink, but got held up because Serena is called from there. And then also
So I probably need to check she's okay and then I'll check she's okay.
I'm falling asleep, so I'm just going to read this page and then get a drink, I think, or these 2 pages and get a drink and some food. I'm just going to ask about the food.